I'd like to talk to you tonight about a book that I wrote a number of years ago, and essentially I had no intentions of writing this book. I started my consulting business back in 1992 after I left Digital Equipment, and I had done an awful lot of international work, so every few years I would do a white paper on our country as a business, and I'd update the graphs and stuff like that, and each time I updated the graphs, they got worse and worse. And they were really pretty bad to start with. And it got me wondering, how the heck did we manage ourselves so brilliantly for 200 years and become so stupid all of a sudden? And this question really haunted me. Well, I'd like to show you one of these graphs. This is our balance of trade. It's probably our single biggest problem. And it's the one that we don't spend any time talking about, and most people don't even understand. Since the early 90s, we have had a negative balance of trade. It's the longest losing streak. Not since the early 90s, I'm sorry, since the early 70s, we've had this negative balance of trade. And we're talking about hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. We are literally exporting our money and our jobs. Now, every time, as I said, I would update those graphs, it would get worse. And I confess they have not been updated since 2008. And there's two reasons for that. The first is, it's not getting any better, it's only getting worse. It's a really depressing job. The other piece is, our government is making this information harder and harder to get your hands on. It used to take, about a day to update these slides. Now it probably takes more than a week because the information has been disseminated to all these different places and you have to go collect it and cross-verify it and everything. So it's really a pretty good-sized task. Well, we talk about our balance of trade and people say, well, okay, so $700–800 billion in our multi-trillion-dollar economy. We can afford that. Oh yeah? If we cum it, in other words, add our losses, now instead of talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, we're talking about $7.5 trillion. Now this is only up until 2008. It's a lot worse today. And to help you understand some of what that means, since 2001 alone, we have closed over 55,000 factories, giving up over 5.5 million manufacturing jobs. You know those good-paying jobs? You get one of those, you can actually raise a family and feed them, send them to school and all that good stuff. Those are the jobs we're sending overseas. And we replace them with hamburger flipping jobs and retail jobs and stuff. Try raising a family doing something like that. Now, I can't understand. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, it doesn't make any difference. I can't understand how anybody with any amount of intelligence can honestly say that it's a good idea to send our money and our jobs overseas. It really isn't. We are going broke. And these graphs, as I said, would drive me crazy. And I was asking myself the question, gee, what could have changed? For 200 years, we were pretty smart. How did we get so stupid? And then one day it hit me. And I thought, no, that's crazy. But I kept, no, it couldn't be. Can you think of anything that happened in the early 70s? Something that might have to do with what we're here with tonight? Roe versus Wade. When we decided it was okay to murder our children in the womb, could it be that God stepped back and said, okay, do it your way for a while? If we read the Bible, especially the Old Testament, everything's going along great until we do something he doesn't like maybe worshiping other gods or something. And all of a sudden he steps back and says, okay, go ahead. Try it your way for a while and see what happens. And usually everything starts going wrong. Now, in the Bible, it's really easy because the sin is right here, and all you have to do is read a few lines down, and there's the punishment. But that might have taken 50 years. We aren't real good at understanding cause and effect. In fact, when I first began to understand this, I thought, wait a minute. They're completely unrelated. What would one have to do with the other? But I started thinking again and again. When we decided that it was okay to murder our children in the womb, did God step back and say, okay, try it your way for a while? And you know what's interesting? He's enabling us to destroy ourselves with our own greed. When somebody makes a decision to send an operation like that overseas, that decision may benefit a very, very small group of people. But it hurts a lot more people. There are people here tonight that used to work for Lucent Technologies. That giant plant on Route 125 in North Andover, 12,500 people used to work there. Not anymore. Just about all those jobs have gone overseas. And of course, it doesn't just affect the plant. I mean, the restaurants in the area, the dry cleaners, everything is affected by that. This is what created the American dream. Our ability to manufacture things. When you do manufacturing correctly, the sum of the parts and the sum of the whole, there's a big gap. And that gap is the profitability that created our prosperity. That's how we were able to pay for these medical advances that we made. That's how we were able to send foreign aid to so many other countries. All the different things that we've been able to do, the good that came out of this, that's where it came from. And yet we are literally destroying our capability to do that. We're just sending it away. You know, I kind of thought, well, wait a minute. Is it really related? So I went and I got myself some data on abortions. And look at that. It all started back in 1973. And by the way, abortion has been around since ancient times. But in 1973, we legalized it and actually started collecting data on it. And by the way, this does not include all the data. For instance, the state of New Hampshire does not report abortions. They had a bill in the state legislature, I think about a year ago, trying to legalize that, and it got shot down. So we are one of 4 states that do not even report abortions. And of course, a lot of them happen and somehow just don't get reported. So these numbers here, which are over 50, 60 million, don't include everything. And they certainly don't include things like the morning after pill and all these other things that happen that are technically abortions as well. And then, could this be related to the other one? I don't know. But if I put those two graphs together, you can see that as the rate of abortions goes up, our balance of trade goes down. They're almost mirror images. Now, any scientist will tell you correlation does not necessarily mean causality, but I don't know. Sometimes it does. So I started looking at other things. What else could I look at? Does, anything else goes on? Our national debt. One of the reasons we have a national debt is because we can't afford our standard of living anymore. We have exported it. And we don't want to decrease our standard of living, so we think we can just keep borrowing. And most people have no idea how big that debt is. It's over $18 trillion right now. But who can understand a number like that? So I translated it into something else. A friend of mine had a little baby. Nice normal birth, wonderful little kid, smiles a lot. Never gone shopping, doesn't have any credit cards. The poor kid is already $45,000 in the hole. Now, by the way, that number was calculated in 2008. If I update it, right now, it's $57,000 in the hole. Where does that number come from? Well, all you do is you take the total debt and you divide it by the number of people. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, the very poor will never be able to pay their share. And some of the rich will find a way out of paying their share. So those of us who are in the dwindling middle class are going to have to pay a lot more than that. But like everything else in our country nowadays, it's not the truth anymore. You see, the debt is a lot higher than 18 trillion. If we include the unfunded obligations for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, it jumps up another, I don't know how many trillion. In fact, the reason why I didn't update this slide is because I can't find the second number. But literally, that child could actually owe $250,000 or more. How are we ever going to climb out of this hole? Think about it now. If you bought a house, paying off a mortgage could be quite a challenge. How would you like to pay off this mortgage and not even have a house to show for it, in addition to trying to buy a house and pay off a mortgage? That's literally what we're talking about, and of course, it's still the same problem. The very poor can't pay their share, and the rich might find a way out of paying theirs. The debt has gone so far out of control. Okay, put that data point aside for a minute. Let's look at something else. The top 10 categories in the federal budget. We keep talking about, what the government spends its money on and how defense is the biggest item. I hate to tell you, defense is not even close to being the biggest item. The biggest item is health and human services. This is a very difficult graph to put together because the government doesn't want us to realize how big health and human services have become. So they've broken it up. You have to go everywhere to collect these data and pull it back together again just to get that number. The second biggest item is Social Security. The bar is a different color because Social Security is not part of the federal budget. Social Security was set up as a separate trust fund. It's actually an annuity that we are legally forced to buy. And Social Security would have no problems at all if they hadn't kept raiding the fund and borrowing it from it. Today, Social Security, instead of having all those trillions of dollars it's supposed to have, has a whole bunch of IOUs from the government. And of course, they don't have the money to pay it. That's where the crisis of Social Security comes from. If we look at the third item, okay, there is defense. But when we look at everything that's going on, ISIS and all these other kinds of things, is that something we want to stop spending? If we really want to protect our way of life? Now this fourth item, interest on the debt. Yeah, now that's a little bit lower right now because they've brought the interest rates down. But we all know that's going to come up again. But look at all the money just on the interest on the debt. And that's not discretionary. We can't cut that. The only way we can cut that is to pay off the debt. The Consumer Price Index. Back in 1967, they decided that year would be the dollar standard. And in 1967, somebody ruled that $100 equaled $100. Well, in 1971, President Nixon took us off the gold standard and allowed the dollar to fluctuate. It's really a promissory note based on the word of our government, but the minute they break that word, those promissory notes become worthless. Well, today, in order to buy what we used to spend $100 for back in 1967, we have to spend almost $700. If you think about it, when I was a kid, most families were raised by one person working. Today, that's not true anymore. Most families are raised by two people working, even if they don't live together. And back in those days, the old days, families had more children. Nowadays, those families may have only 1 or 2 children. Both parents are working. And do we really have any more than we used to have? Oh yeah, we have color TVs and microwave ovens, but is that really any more? You know, the graph tells us one thing, but we really have to assimilate and put everything back together. Because now we're working a lot harder and realistically have a lot less. And with both parents working, who is raising those children? We wonder why we have all the vandalism, all the crime. Why does a kid go into school and start shooting other students and teachers? Where did he learn that from? Of course, on the one hand, we spend so much time taking God out of schools. What do we think the absence of God is? Just in the last few days, there have been horrific murders. A news anchor woman and her photographer got murdered on TV. People say, oh, what a terrible thing. And they're right. But what do we think the absence of God is? If you study ancient history, go back to pagan Rome, I mean, that stuff happened all the time. They used to have people go feed the lions in the Colosseum just for fun so they could watch. Life wasn't valued at all. And by the way, we have that problem today. If we decide it's okay to kill this kind of life and that kind of life, the first thing you know, all life is expendable. Another example, the subprime mortgage crisis, 2008. Remember that terrible thing? And Lehman Brothers went down the tubes, and all of a sudden you couldn't borrow money anymore, and what a crisis. But you know something? It didn't happen in 2008. It didn't even happen in 2000. Back in 1977, 30 years before, Jimmy Carter signed something called the Community Reinvestment Act. The idea was, let's make it easier for poor people to buy houses. They will buy the houses and the apartment buildings they live in, and we'll get rid of the slumlords. And because now they own the house, they'll fix them up, and we'll get rid of the slums. Well, it hasn't quite worked that way. But the interesting thing is, if you allow people to borrow money that they can't afford to repay, what happens? The foreclosure rate goes up right away. And that's what happened. But because real estate prices were going up, a lot of people used to like to flip houses. You know, a young couple go out and they buy a house, fix it up a little bit, keep it a couple of years and sell it. And they usually would make some money on that sale and use that to buy the next house. And some people would do that every 2 or 3 years and make quite a bit of money. And that worked great. And when that was happening, you could hide some of this. And it went on for years. Bill Clinton took that Community Reinvestment Act and he literally put it on steroids. In 1995, he went to the banks and said, hey, look it, if you aren't willing to lend this money under those conditions, it's going to count against you. And then again in 1999, he tightened up the criteria some more. So the banks wanted nothing to do with this at first, but with the real estate market going up, they figured, well, wait a minute, this is not such a bad deal. So now they were a little bit more willing. Maybe they let a few more of these than they really should have. But all of a sudden, the bubble burst in 2008. Now, the two people that got blamed for this the most were George Bush and our own senator at the time, Chris Sununu. The two of them had tried to prevent this a couple of years before by trying to rein in Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac, the mortgage lending corporations. By then, this had become an entitlement. There were a lot of minorities who had these mortgages, and they couldn't stop them. The President of the United States couldn't stop these. And they just kept right on borrowing until the whole thing collapsed. Again, this problem started right after the early 70s. How about the oil crisis? Now, this is something I remember very well. I graduated from college in 1973, and college wasn't fun for me. I went to school full-time during the day and held a full-time job at night. I even went to summer school to take some of the load off so I wouldn't have to take so many classes during the winter. When I finally graduated, boy, I had to celebrate. I bought myself a brand spanking new Mustang Mach 1. 351 Cleveland, 4-speed Hearst. It would pass anything but a gas station. Gas was 30-something cents a gallon when I bought that car. A few months later, we had the first oil crisis. Gas went up to $1.60 a gallon, and we had to wait in long lines for it. And I was in trouble with this car that would pass anything but a gas station. To show you how, we just can't do things anymore, back when this was discovered, President Nixon realized that we were importing over 1/3 of our oil. So he started this thing called the Department of Energy, and what they were supposed to do was decrease our dependence on foreign oil, make us energy independent. Well, by 2008, we were importing 70% of our oil. Great job by the Department of Energy, by the way. But when our country was built, when our forefathers were doing things, we used to be able to do things. Those of us who live in this area have been struggling through the I-93 widening project. Did you ever notice how it's taking a lot longer to widen that road than it ever took to build it in the first place? We've lost our mojo. We can't make things happen anymore. Even our best intentions, somehow something goes wrong. Our truthless society. We live in an era of what I call profitable truth. The truth is, what is profitable for somebody has nothing to do with the real truth. Let me give you an example. Is the economy coming back or isn't it? I just love this one. They talk about a jobless recovery. There's no such thing. Every company has the same problem, not enough customers. And the ones they have aren't buying enough. Unemployed people don't buy things. We are expected to believe this jobless recovery with millions of unemployed people is the new normal. That's the way it's going to be. And somehow that's going to be okay. We can leave all those people in poverty and not worry about it. Should we have gone into Iraq or not? There are more opinions on this, and some people are even willing to fight over them. I've been to the Middle East. And before I go to another country, I always study their culture and their history and a little bit of their language if I can and stuff like that. I have no idea whether we should have gone to Iraq or not. But people who can't even find it on a map know whether we should go or not. Should we be losing so many jobs offshore? We've already talked about that one. No, I don't think it's a good idea. Is global warming real? Now, this is another argument that has just become incredibly heated. The Holy Father has even come out and said a few things about it. But you know something? If global warming is real, why, every time we examine the data, have they been fabricated? When I went to engineering school, first thing they taught us was, as a scientist, when you do an experiment, you have to make sure that your data, your results are reproducible. If they aren't, if you lied, once you get caught, your credibility is gone. You're all washed up. On this particular argument, even the head of NASA got caught lying, and he still has his job. If it's really happening, why do they have to keep lying? And oh, by the way, last winter, thank God for global warming. Think of how much worse it would have been. I mean, when we look at our real experiences and then we look at what they want us to believe, the reality, the lies have become so blatant that all we have to do is look carefully. And it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Will Social Security be there for us or not? We're in the middle of an election year. Seems like we're always in an election year here in New Hampshire, doesn't it? I mean, the minute somebody gets elected, they start the next set of campaigns. But you got all these guys running around the countryside talking about everything, But a lot of them don't even want to talk about what everybody wants them to talk about. And this is certainly one of those questions that nobody wants to have anything to do with. Do 2 out of 3 doctors really recommend? How many commercials have we heard? Oh yeah, 2 out of 3 doctors, or 3 out of 4, or whatever. Is that really true? And of course, all the trucks we see riding around here, we always sell for less. Always. Is that really true? I don't think it is. What about our leaders? Who do we believe in today? Do we believe any of our political leaders? When you go to the polls to vote, do you go to vote for somebody? Or do you go to vote against the other person? That's what I've been doing for a long, long time. I figure out who do I think is going to be the lesser of 2 evils, and that's who I'm going to try to vote for. What about our business leaders? Scandal after scandal. We can't believe them. When the whole Enron thing started unfolding, and the employees started asking, well, should we unload it? Oh, no, hold on to the stock. Meanwhile, the executives who were telling them to hold on to the stock were selling theirs. And how about our athletes and other celebrities? Right now, there's major controversy about something called Deflategate. I mean, that's really important, isn't it? Instead of worrying about all these world concerns, we have to worry about the footballs. But the thing is, nobody knows whether they're innocent or they're guilty. And what's interesting is, if they are in fact guilty, it's the second time they got caught cheating. A lot of people are very likely to believe that. Not in this part of the country, I admit. But just go to some other part of the country and hear them talk about it. So what do we do? If all this is true, how do we get out of this mess? And to me, the first big thing we have to do is we have to pray. That's the most powerful force on earth. We have created a problem, a bunch of problems we cannot solve. See, all of our reward systems encourage exactly the wrong behaviors. Our politicians aren't there to represent us. They are there to get reelected. That's all they want. The minute they get into office, they start raising funds for the next election. Unless you're a major contributor, they don't even want to hear from us. Our business leaders, a CEO today is rewarded on the stock price. They thought that was brilliant. So CEOs are pretty sharp people. They know how to jack up the price artificially for a while, get their big bonus, and then let the whole thing settle right back down. A bunch of people end up losing their jobs, but hey, the guy got a good bonus. Forgiveness. And of course, this one here's the tough one. But if we're going to pray and ask God to help us, He told us how many times that we have to forgive. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So how do we forgive people who have had abortions? Or even worse than that, the people who perform them. But if we really want God's help, that's what He wants. And I have to tell you, I've had to counsel a few women that have had abortions, and they already feel so guilty. There's no need to make them feel worse. In fact, what you've got to try to do is help them understand that, yeah, God forgives them. Stop funding abortions. Again, here in New Hampshire, it's about a month ago, we had this major battle, and we succeeded in defunding Planned Parenthood. And part of that came from the big scandal about all the selling of the videos of the selling of the body parts and stuff like that. But the fight's not over, and we're not completely out of the woods, and they're still getting hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars from our government. And most people don't realize this. We are not just paying for abortions over here. Planned Parenthood is one of the largest NGOs at the United Nations. NGOs is non-governmental organizations. We are literally funding abortions throughout the world through that. All these poor countries where they have it and they can't, we're taking care of it. So we're not just paying for the murders over here. We're paying for a lot of the murders beyond our shores. We have to be very careful who we vote for. In fact, that's kind of the next one. People say, well, abortion is only one issue. Well, that may be true. But to me, it is the issue. Way back in the 70s, a priest told me that once you accept the big lie, all the other lies come easy. The big lie is that abortion is not murder. And back then I thought, I didn't understand it. But a few years older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I began to realize we can't loosen somebody's moral fiber enough to accept abortion without also loosening it enough to accept a whole bunch of other unsavory practices. So if a politician is pro-abortion, do we really think that politician is capable of coming up with the right answers on, say, health care, foreign policy, the economy, national security, or any of those other things? You see, the same flawed belief system, the same corrupt judgment is going to make all those other decisions too. And a lot of people think, well, I got to vote for this person because I belong to that party. And every time an abortion thing comes up, I'll send them a letter asking them not to support it. That doesn't work. If somebody campaigns on they are pro-abortion, you can bet your life they are being funded by Planned Parenthood and others. You can send all the letters you want. You can make all the phone calls. It's not going to change a thing. That will never have the impact of all those election dollars that they need to run. Unless the person is willing to publicly say, no, I'm against that, you probably don't want to touch that candidate. There's one other piece too. I imagine everybody here has seen the movie The Godfather. You know, we've always been somehow enthralled with the mafia and how it works. In fact, last summer, down in Boston, they had the Whitey Bulger trial. And whether you wanted to or not, there were daily reports on what was going on and how horrific everything was. Well, it's generally agreed, if a mafia boss hires a mechanic, they call it, to go commit a murder, the mechanic, the guy who goes and pulls the trigger, is guilty of murder. But so is the person who hired him. So Whitey Bulger was found guilty not just of the murders he committed himself, but for all the murders he had ordered. When we vote for a politician that is pro-abortion, it's just like hiring that mechanic, that killer. We share in that guilt. A piece of that belongs to us. And I don't know about you. When I get to the pearly gates, I'm kind of nervous. You know, I'm just hoping that somehow I'll be good enough to somehow get in. But the last thing I want to show up with is that kind of baggage and having to explain all of that. There are a number of pro-life organizations. New Hampshire Right to Life is one over here. There are a number of national organizations. These folks need help if we're ever going to turn this around. The problem is the bad guys have a lot of funding from the government. The folks who are trying to turn it around don't get that kind of funding. So whether you can send some money or even get involved. One of the things that happens quite a bit up in Manchester, there's a Planned Parenthood on Pennacook Street in Manchester. It's right off of Elm Street. And on Thursdays when they have the abortions, it's not unusual to see some good Christian people out there praying. And as the people are going in for the abortions, they're trying to give them leaflets and maybe talk to them to reconsider, whatever. And I understand that they've stopped quite a few of them. What we're really trying to do is save the lives. And then use the right language. This business about, it's no such thing as being pro-choice. It's pro-abortion. They try to change the name to make it less offensive. But it's really abortion. Just like for homosexuality, they call it gay. Gay means happy. It's got nothing to do with homosexuality, but somehow they've rebranded it that way because nobody wants to be called a homosexual. Well, regardless of how you look at things, we have a wonderful language with over 600,000 words. We don't need to take other words and try to misrepresent them to disguise what we're talking about. The issues are complicated enough without trying to confuse people with the incorrect terminology. And then finally, be careful what you watch and what you listen to. A lot of the stuff that's on TV today is just absolutely the opposite of what we should be trying to do if we have any hope for eternal life. And people say, well, I only watch sports. Well, that may be wonderful, but just look at some of those commercials. We have to be very careful. In the music industry, a lot of the rock and roll recordings have subliminal messages. Back in the 80s, I had a girlfriend that was a music teacher. And she took me to a music store one day and had me look at the sheet music for some of the most popular songs. And I was amazed. A lot of them were testaments to homosexuality. But when I listened to them on the radio, I never made the connection because I never consciously heard the message. But the subconscious never misses anything. If we wonder why things like homosexuality are so much more accepted today than they used to be, after all these decades of playing these messages, people are far more accepting. It's like we're being reprogrammed, and most of us don't even realize it. Be very careful what you watch and what you listen to. I'd like to leave you, if I could, with a couple of stanzas from Psalm 127. If the Lord does not build a house, in vain do its builders labor. If the Lord does not watch over the city, in vain does the watchman keep vigil. In vain is your earlier rising, you're going later to rest. You who toil for the bread you eat, when he pours gifts on his beloved while they slumber. Our forefathers quoted part of this psalm, in the Constitutional Convention when they were praying for it. They were religious people. Our country was founded on godly principles. That's why we became so great. The subtitle of my book, Has God Stopped Blessing America?, is a playoff of the Irving Berlin song, God Bless America. We became so great, not because we were great, but because God blessed us. Every time we tried to do something, he blessed us and improved the results. Then all of a sudden, we started thinking we were great, and we didn't need him anymore. And then we decided, hey, the kid's not convenient, get rid of him. And I don't know for sure, but I honestly believe that he's probably taken a step back and said, go ahead, try it your way for a while. And we've seen we're not doing a great job doing it our way. If we ever want to turn this around, if we ever want to rebuild or reclaim the American dream, we can't possibly do it without his help. And by the way, this entire presentation isn't the real reason for stopping abortions. Abortions are such a vulgar, such a terrible crime. I mean, just the idea of murdering those children should be enough. The only reason why I wrote this book and pulled all of this together was because so many people think, hey, I don't do abortions. It's got nothing to do with me. I hate to say, if you live in this country, whether you've had one or not, whether you've supported one or not, we are all suffering from this. And just maybe, if more people understood the more universal consequences, we might have a better chance at stopping it.